So this is the last episode before the finale, which we continue the drama in Aspen from last week. Then we get plunged into a little bit of a darker place, probably the darkest place this season, but then we come out of it with some fun moments all in one episode. And later on, we'll get into some Real Housewives of Beverly Hills news and go over some more former housewife take. That and more in this 16th episode of season 16 of Real Housewives of Orange County. Recap and react. All right, let's get right into it too. Picking up where last episode left off with Heather saying, you know what, fuck it, let's have the chat now, to Noella, as this is still the first night in Aspen after that day of travel and the dramatic dinner that we saw last week, where now Heather and Noella are sitting in the other room. But of course, anyone can really hear what they're saying if you're standing close enough to that room and don't get caught. So Heather and Noella then are starting by saying, or Noella basically saying, it's hitting her hard knowing that what she said hurt Heather's family, and if I said something to hurt them, I apologize. Not the best apology, but this poor apology trend will continue a little later with some others in the cast. But Heather then, after some silence and Noella asking, do you hear me? Do you receive what I just told you? Which I think was kind of edited visually for dramatic effect, says, it is not how I feel, it's what you've said. Where Heather says, I've let things go many times so far because I feel for what you are going through. But at some point, my family is more important to me than what you are going through. This is when Noella then asks Heather directly again, did you put your hands on a member of the crew that night? And Heather, of course, says no, but continues to defend herself while also getting more heated as we recount what happened at the dinner last night, or last episode. And Heather is at her breaking point now after Noella is saying, I did follow you down the staircase, blah, 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 and continues to try to entertain this conversation about shoving people against the walls by Heather, and Heather proceeds to get up and storm off, which is a pattern she continues, which we touched on last time. Heather, as she is trying to leave and Jen now enters the room, takes advantage of her standing up and Noella sitting down to pull out her inner parent talking to a child to stand over Noella, scolding her as a liar and a thirsty girl after saying, I'm a grown-ass woman with a beautiful family, in response to Noella calling her out for saying she's a grown-ass woman, but then keeps walking away from these conversations and not finishing them. And basically Heather's like, I'm done. Well, Noella, as her unbothered self, follows behind Heather and says, okay, bye, and calmly saying, wow, I'm surprised you know what thirsty means, implying that Heather maybe isn't very self-aware, which I may agree with her. And now in front of the group, they are kind of explaining why they aren't resolving this because Noella won't back down on the claim. And they basically end the night finally all eating some of the food that Shannon, Emily, and Gina were enjoying while Noella and Heather were trying to work things out. So this was the same tone Heather used when scolding Shannon at the bar party after the Nobu disaster, where the whole lawsuit came out about Terry and Heather. At this point, Noella at worst lied by omission, but I don't ever remember Noella saying she saw the shoving happen. And up to this point, she hasn't really been challenged on the details because it was always shut down or never even brought up in front of the group. Also, I enjoyed Jen's face, almost laughing at what she was seeing happening between Noella and Heather. And I get that Heather is saying that she has to look after herself at the end of the day, but I don't think Heather is going through in her life what Noella is going through, and it just kind of comes off a little bit mean again. So we'll have to wait to see more of that. But the next morning, it is now the next morning, and Gina is catching up with Travis on the phone, where Noella is getting poured a drink to go with her breakfast in bed as she is FaceTiming Kenny about what just happened. Kenny we saw earlier in the season when Noella was talking to her, debriefing the what was it called? The mediation between her and James. And saying that she's not going to archery with the other girls, and gets emotional about how Heather threw the karma line back at Noella the night before. Noella didn't share with her friend Kenny that she was the one that started with the whole karma thing from what we saw in the show, and Heather wasn't specific about what karma she was talking about. Now that led to Noella embellishing and kind of implying or assuming what Heather meant by the karma line by saying that Heather maybe was happy about her divorce and her son's autism and her dad's death. Of course, Heather not being specific made that a problem. I'll get to that in a second. But she said basically it was like high school with wrinkles, but she sees everyone as scared of Heather. And since Noella isn't, that is why she thinks she's being targeted and attacked. So Kenny's lips first look even bigger without makeup, and I immediately thought she maybe needs to lay off the lip filler or the implants, whatever she has, because they don't look very natural. I think it's even worse than Taylor Armstrong and Lisa Rinna in Beverly Hills. Just a thought. But also, I do think Heather was mean for saying the karma comment to Noella and could have said it in a different way, or at least be more specific about which things happening with Noella are the karma part of what she was trying to say. Because now, like I said, we are left to interpret and assume what Heather meant, which now can be spun as Noella did in the scene to make it seem like Heather was happy about her son's autism or her dad dying or her getting a divorce. Also, Noella is right about others being afraid of Heather, in my opinion. So Heather is then catching up with Gina and Emily about last night, saying she is packing a sandwich for Emily, a throwback to the sandwich sauna scene earlier in the season, and Advil because they were drinking and they might get a headache from being around other people. And they're saying how Noella is a liar and it would be fascinating if it wasn't so irritating. So the other girls are getting ready to head out for archery, where we learn Shannon actually wanted to shoot actual guns, but Emily convinced her that may not be a good idea, which I think was a good call on Emily's part, followed by Shannon arriving in this interesting outfit for the outdoors. Now, let me know what you think of this. We've seen many interesting looks over the years across all the franchises of Housewives, and I want to know where you think this one ranks amongst all of them. Let me know in the comments. But Jen then joins the group, and they all head out for the day, with Noella, who is staying behind to rest because she's going through a lot. But on the car ride over, there are a lot of digs, I should say, by the girls, minus Shannon, about Noella, and Emily in her confessional takes a moment to point out how Jen likes to parrot what Heather says and doesn't seem to have a mind of her own. Now, we see a few examples of this, and we'll see a few more in this episode, but in the after show, this happened again. But Emily could also be going into troubled waters here because she's been accused of being kind of up Heather's butt a little bit too. So maybe this is another piece of evidence in support of the claim that Emily is deflecting her jealousy and her whatever of the friendships with Heather on other people. Who knows? But the girls then arrive to a breathing exercise at the range, which presumably is so they aren't tense and don't shoot each other. We see them then shoot arrows, and Emily was the best of them all, where we then learn Gina and Noella and Emily are going to be visiting a mine later, not just go shopping at Louis Vuitton like Emily said, because she likes to actually learn about the areas she visits, which makes sense. But then while they're all out there, Noella is on her own, now out of bed, explaining how everything is so heavy with her right now, from missing her kids to mourning the loss of her father. And then we learn more about her divorce, including how she is now signing off on destroying the embryos her and James had together. So Noella then heads to a stream of water to let her emotions in nature out, of which she says she felt her father for the first time since losing him in this setting, and he would have really liked this setting. So she arrives back at the house, followed by Gina and Emily arriving to pick her up to head to the mine tour, after Gina drags Emily to her room because she's so exhausted from the altitude and from the exercise and whatnot. So I think Noella laying out her challenges in this scene has me changing my earlier statement of this season, my favorite newbie being Jen. And after the last few episodes, they are now closer together as far as favorites go. And Noella is actually creeping ahead of Jen in this case. Also, I do understand Noella's working herself up to cry like this, even though I want to say it is fake. Although on the after show, Noella was saying how she's never really made that noise before, and that's just kind of what came out of her. I also said something like this related to Erika Jayne during the recaps of last season of Beverly Hills, where she was crying and hyperventilating and talking to herself in emotion when Garcelle exposed their conversation about Erika confiding in Garcelle about still having Tom contacting her when she wasn't supposed to on their trip to La Quinta. So more on the friendship changes later. But after a silent car ride, there was no check-ins between Gina, Emily, and Noella, and there was kind of a surface level conversation. So they tried to make it seem more awkward than I think it was, partly because I don't think it is abnormal to have a silent, kind of uncomfortable car ride, especially in the mornings, because I know I've had silent car rides during the mornings too. Maybe I'm just an awkward person. I don't know. But they take the mine tour where they are having flashbacks to the sweat lodge in Cabo, and that was the last cave-like structure these three were in. So they met Fred, the handsome man, where we also learned that some people have died in this cave, implying there are ghosts there, where Gina says she wishes she brought her demon dust she received at her extraction a few weeks ago to avoid the spirits. Now, in the after show, Emily shared that they also learned, basically after they had already done the tour, that there's been hundreds of men that have died in that cave over the years, basically saying that it was actually worse than the guy led on. But then Emily hits her head on the rock, leading us to learn more about how short the miners were back in the day, which gives them an easy in to make fun of Shane, her husband, and after some sexual innuendos of how miners worked, referencing the stack of vaginas from earlier in the season, we then go to Heather, Jen, and Shannon, who are taking a hike to a different creek than Noella was at earlier, where Heather says she is happy, and Jen parrots her, giving us another clear example of them kind of, or Jen not really having a mind of her own. But anyways, Shannon then is sharing her thoughts on Emily stirring things up with controversial topics, where Emily repeats things she hears without thinking it through before reporting back to people. But Heather seems to be Switzerland on this issue, saying, is it shit stirring or is it truth telling? Harkening back to Heather's famous last words at the dinner last night before being a hypocrite about not liking liars or mean people or shit stirs. This sets the scene, though, for Shannon to finally hash things out with Emily and Gina. So everyone is back together at the house, where Noella is trying to connect with Shannon about her emotional time in nature she just had, where Shannon appears to be kind of uninterested somewhat by how she is sitting, almost as if she's embarrassed or trying to dismiss Noella or telling her subtly to kind of be quiet, and Noella's missing the social cues. I don't know. But Emily and Shannon then go outside to hash out their issues with communication and how the negativity between them is not needed in such a good time in her life, where Emily is trying to explain to Shannon how Shannon and Gina's issues end up becoming Emily's issues too, because she is close with Gina. They agree to move forward by not letting Gina's issues with them affect their relationship, and they give two more I apologize if this episode, and they agree that their friendship is worth working out. And they finally finalize some fun surprises for the girls later, which we will find out very soon, and I will share my thoughts on that surprise in this and the reconciliation a little later in the episode. So Noella is FaceTiming her mom from the jacuzzi now about finalizing the divorce, hoping things go up from there, leaving James in the past. And then she drops her, or spills her fruit salad in the water, where Emily is now joining Gina and Heather after her conversation with Shannon to share how they how the day has been so fun and not really drama filled, so they want to squash all the drama at dinner. Which are, of course, famous last words, considering the next sentence is Gina now annoyed by Shannon making up with Emily so easily and not her. So let's keep going now to nightfall, where it appears Noella is updating the girls on the divorce as they wait for the rest of the group to enjoy some live music before dinner. And she's saying basically this is one of the fastest divorces in California history. And they appear to be happy for her so she can stop talking about it to them. But I think they may have spoken too soon, because according to Noella's appearances on Watch What Happens Live this season, all after this episode was filmed and the season was filmed, and on social media, she still hasn't reached an agreement with James. But then Emily and Shannon pretend to go to the bathroom, but are really executing the prank surprise that we just mentioned on the other girls of dressing as bears to scare them. But Shannon has a bear sound machine in her suit that sounds like a fart machine. Now, we've seen this whole thing done so many times, not only on Real Housewives of Orange County when Lori and George went to Jackson Hole, and I think it was Ashley and Mackenzie, their daughter and stepdaughter, tried this on their camping trip. I think it was season 2 or 3. I think on Laguna Beach, the reality show, they did this, and I'm sure there's many other reality TVs that have tried this. I'm pretty sure on the Brady Bunch, a scripted show, they did this too. It's kind of an old thing and kind of tired, but if it brings the group together, then great. Anyways, the girls didn't really fall for it because the area was well lit, as Emily pointed out, and they were walking on their 2 feet, not on 4 legs like a real bear would do. After they do some dancing to the music outside, Noella is seeing Gina spiraling, so she heads inside to hopefully get away from the trouble, but because they're about to have dinner, trouble follows. But as they sit down, they start playing a game with light conversation about what was your first job. And so Gina goes saying she was a waitress. Noella then says her first job was at 15 or 16 in a Will Smith video. Very ironic considering what's happening with Will Smith right now. It almost seems like it's staged, but it's not. But quickly this turned south when Noella, not knowing who Tatiana, Gina's friend, is, when Gina brings her up in reference to the modeling that Noella was just talking about, or acting, whatever, because Tatiana's kids, I guess, model or whatnot. But upon clarification, Noella says, "Oh, Tatiana, yeah, of course I met her, blah, blah, blah." But clearly Noella has met a lot of new people and hasn't exactly been the closest to Gina and is new to the group. So I don't see why Noella was expected to remember every detail. Noella says, "Well, it's not really that deep." And everyone else seems to think the same thing. Even Shannon is saying, "Well, I didn't really know who Tatiana was for 2 years." And everyone else is kind of joking about like having a nickname to your name. But Gina says, "Well, it is important to me because if you know me, you need to know who Tatiana is. She's my best friend, blah, blah, blah." So Gina walks away frustrated after Shannon backs up Noella again, saying she didn't even know who Tatiana was. And Gina then slurs her words, saying, "Great, that means you give 0 F's about me." Where Emily in her confessional is saying, okay, Gina being mad about this superficial thing, she's overreacting, but I think this is masking a deeper issue that Gina has with the group and with Noella, where we don't really know what that deeper issue is at the moment. I don't think we've really gotten to the bottom of that. But now Gina is saying to Emily, she remembers Noella's friend Kenny. So she's trying to prove her point as far as like, you don't need to know someone that well to remember a friend and their name. But Shannon is left behind with Noella to console her because everyone else got out from the table. It seems like a pattern this season too. And she's doing what a good friend would do to her new friend in this group who's having trouble not only in the group but in the outside of the group world she lives in. Where Shannon is trying to play peacemaker at this point, and Noella says this was supposed to be a healing time for her, but it does not feel like a safe space for her. Shannon then is validating her feelings as Noella is crying, and they lighten the mood when Noella is trying to fix her outfit to hide her vagina, saying, well, and then Shannon says, well, it doesn't really matter because we've kind of all seen it at this point. I thought that was a funny comment. But anyways, Shannon and Gina are now talking in the kitchen where Gina says shit happens when Shannon is trying to remind them what Noella is going through, including losing her father. and to kind of ease up on her. Shannon in her confessional was rightfully shocked by Gina's flippant comment over the father's death. I think maybe this was edited to make Gina look bad. Who knows? But Gina most likely meant stuff happens in life, but that doesn't give you the opportunity to treat people poorly. Gina then says that she's never acted that way in her darkest times and says she thinks Shannon is banking this in her memory to eventually use against Noella in the future against her, similar to how she thinks Shannon used the help with the DUI against Gina now. And Gina says basically, I don't feel bad for Noella because she's going to get a large check from the divorce. So the episode ends there, and we'll get to the season finale predictions from the preview in a moment. But let's get to the reaction to this last scene. So as far as Tatiana Gate between Gina and Noella, I thought maybe Noella hasn't really heard Gina really talk about Tatiana to her. Or maybe she referred to her as Tot, and when she said Tatiana at the table here, maybe she didn't correlate the two or is confused. Who knows? But this to me shows the on-camera versus real-life dynamic of the show, where if you are bringing your off-camera life on camera, you have to explain things in a more unnatural, more thought-out way than you would in real life. And this, I think, was one of those instances. But also, I think that Tatiana, Kenny, and Tawny, the three friends we kind of seen throughout the season, could be either friends of or new cast next season, depending on how they want to stack the sides, assuming that dynamics don't completely change post-reunion or before filming starts, or even if they do film again. Who knows? But I do think Gina did blow this out of proportion, and on the after show, she tried to blame it on the alcohol, but I'm not really buying that as an excuse, because that to me means you probably actually really think these things. And Shannon, I think, handled this really well, and overall, I think this trip left a sour taste in my mouth for both Gina and Heather. And in this scene, I actually saw what Shannon was saying earlier about Gina seemed a little arrogant, and I think the drinking really brought it out on camera for us to see. So overall, this episode and this season so far, heading into the reunion, I get where everyone is coming from, protecting their own family or friends or whatever, and setting boundaries, but also some of the feelings coming across as jealousy. But my question is, how does this group move forward unless everything is put on the table by everyone? And that is why I'm looking forward to not only the finale, but also the reunion. And specifically the finale right now, because that's going to air in a few minutes. But Heather has been teasing in her media appearances about the season ending like never before. And I have a feeling it's going to be overhyped and underdeliver if the preview is about the cast performing in a band, like the whole cast for some reason, in costume, is any indication about what she may have meant. I don't know, but I do think this season has been a microcosm of how the world works, where we can't always control who we are around, but we do our best to find a way to exist next to each other, which I think if that's reality, then reality TV in this case works. I do think, though, this episode was Emily trying to save her other friendships outside of Heather and distance herself from that side of the Heather and Jen and Gina, because Noella exposed her in front of Heather at the dinner table the night before in front of the whole group, and maybe sees Gina as kind of breaking off from her to Heather's side, if you will. But next week, meaning tonight, in the next recap and react for the finale, there'll be likely a 2 or 3 part reunion, because 4 weeks from now, May 11th, Wednesday, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, RHOBH, will premiere its 12th season. So if we get 3 parts of OC reunion, then we likely will not have a break or a week off between OC ending and Beverly Hills starting, which, by the way, I'm going to be recapping that season as well. But we did get a trailer for season 12 of Beverly Hills, which I shared on my community tab for those of you on YouTube to check out, officially from Bravo. And you can also find playlist to last season's recaps and reacts for Beverly Hills season 11 from my channel, which I will also share on a separate community tab post in the coming days. So with that said, let's get into some former housewife reactions to what happened. So first, Kelly Dodd and Rick Leventhal have their own channel, and they were talking about how they think Emily's shining moment of the season was actually calling out Jen this episode for parroting Heather. They thought Noella's scream in the wilderness was staged, which I said earlier, I can see how people might think is staged, but I also understand that type of emotion. Kelly then says Gina is way more mean than they show on camera, and last year they didn't show Gina's meanness towards Elizabeth. They also agreed that the bear scare was stupid, and Kelly also confirmed my suspicion about Tatiana potentially being on the show in the future, because Kelly says she has been thirsty to be on the show for many years, ever since Gina came on the show. I guess Tatiana moved from the East Coast to be closer to Gina to try to get on the show, and she goes to all the parties and tries to weasel her way into camera time, which, if Noella is any example of trying to weasel your way on a show, then I don't see why Tatiana might not end up as a cast member on the show. Who knows? But then we had Dana Wilkey on her dishing drama with Dana Wilkey channel, where she was reacting to last week's Kelly revelation on her channel of the text between Emily and her over the pushing incident of Heather pushing production and whatnot, and confirmed what I said last week of Noella trying to skirt around breaking the fourth wall. And Dana said she thinks that Bravo is actually listening to us, the viewers, on wanting to see things exposed related to Terry and Heather and the whole lawsuit with his practice and the alleged bad reviews for his practice online. Dana reiterates that the claim that Heather's friendship with Nicole James was fake, which it's not hard to come to that conclusion, considering it didn't make sense that Heather or Terry wouldn't remember who sued them unless they get sued way more than we think and way more than the average doctor. In that case, there is some credibility to the bad reviews that look worse, knowing that Terry is on a show called Botched, where they are supposed to fix botched plastic surgery. Maybe he's overcompensating for something or trying to make up for a bad past, or use that as a way to debunk some of the claims against him. I don't know, but let me know what you think of this episode and the whole season so far before we head into the finale tonight. And make sure to tap or click around the channel if you're on YouTube or on Rumble or on a podcasting platform to watch more and see more. And of course, check out the Beverly Hills playlists from last season as we head into their season premiere. And let me know what you expect from the reunion, and I'll see you in the next finale recap and react very, very soon. And with that said, I will talk to you in the next one. Bye-bye.